A pistol for a menu parser. Exciting. Wow, is that some bad music. Lin Zexu No Smoking is a 1996 Famicom game developed by Weixin Computer and Technology Co. I love their mascot character. Is it some kind of jellyfish? Notice the copyright date, though. 1996. The same year as Super Mario 64. Isn't that a bit late for a Famicom game? The last Nintendo-approved Famicom release was Adventure Island 4 in 1994, and the last NES one, The Lion King, in 1995. But, though they certainly aren't receiving the Nintendo seal of quality, people have continued creating and selling games on the system up to the present day. Some of these homebrew titles, such as Zooming Secretary here, are simple arcade-style experiences, albeit with interesting themes, in this case a satire of office work. Others are more impressive. Check out this multiplayer run-and-gun Micro Mages, which MorphCat Games released on Steam in 2019. The Famicom's also been receiving new games in Japan, such as Columbus Circle's Kira Kira Star Knight DX. Though this 2013 game consists of fairly simple arcade action, the sprite work is god tier. Look at that girl dance. It's incredible. Lin Zexu, though, is a title from the Chinese video game tradition. Back in the 80s and 90s, Nintendo never officially released the Famicom to the PRC, but the various Famicom clones floating around China and Hong Kong, such as the Super video game system and the Micro Genius, allowed children there to enjoy some of these video games with the power of piracy. If you've ever encountered one of those 30 games in one Famicom cartridges, like, say, in the YouTube man shouting about old video games genre, they were made for systems like these. Many countries had their own local Famicom clones, such as Russia's Dendy and Poland's Pegasus, which were both manufactured by Microgenius, incidentally. Years after other countries began receiving newer gaming consoles, many folks in China who could access video games continued to stick with the Famicom. That's why there are unlikely Chinese Famicom ports for popular releases like Final Fantasy VII. It's a fascinating snippet of the video game cultures of countries some people might assume had none back then. Though no longer receiving dozens of new releases each month, in a way, through the NES and its other guises, the Famicom never died. Lin Zexu No Smoking, or Lin Zexu Jinyan, sorry for the mispronunciation, is no bootleg or ROM hack, but an original game. This is a fan translation by Pack and Snack Dave, who's also responsible for granting English-language audiences access to such classics as Huangdi, The Battle of Zhulo, and the Chinese Famicom version of Tomb Raider, the latter of which came out in 2007. Like I said, the Famicom never died. So many video games draw from genre fiction, and Lin Zexu is no exception. For the story and gameplay, Weixin Co. takes inspiration from kung fu films like Once Upon a Time in China. Martial artists battle imperialists in the 19th century. Although beating people up for smoking cigarettes would make for a funny premise, the drug being smoked is opium. Lin Zexu is a popular historical figure, an official who rose to prominence in the first half of the 19th century. His proposals for reform would later inspire the self-strengthening movement. The opening here is actually a bit wrong, if I understand correctly. Qing China had been facing major problems with opium well before and after 1839. Lin had been battling opium smugglers for years already when the Daoguang Emperor appointed him imperial commissioner. An ambitious man, Lin devoted his whole life to battling the opium that British imperialists used to poison his country, and later waving the banner of free trade to justify invading it and annexing Hong Kong. Lin also famously wrote a scathing letter to Queen Victoria. "In your face, Victoria! All those people in China who sell opium or smoke opium should receive the death penalty." Not sure I agree there. Surely, instead of wholesale massacre, you could try to help the victims of drug addiction? I mean, I guess this is where the US took inspiration for the war on drugs, but in any case, none of this matters. Shockingly, Lin Zexu No Smoking is not a historical education game. The player doesn't control Lin Zexu, but rather the martial artist Lungyan Yu, who I'm pretty sure is fictional. This makes sense, since Lin Zexu spends all day pacing back and forth. That would not be an interesting video game. By the way, after this, when I say Lin Zexu, I'm referring to the game, not the person. His refusal to stand still actually makes maneuvering Yu into a position to talk to him slightly difficult. Will you press the interact button at the right moment? So, is Lin Zexu a hidden gem? No. I think pretty much every other homebrew game I've mentioned in this video is much better, except Huangdi and the Tomb Raider game, which are only slightly better. Although, none of them offer quite the experience Lin Zexu does. Lin Zexu is divided into 4 levels called acts that require the player to take a certain series of actions to reach the ending, and, in turn, the next act. These interactions are very basic, simply talking to NPCs and then completing action sequences. Each act features a main bad guy we're out to hunt down. And I suppose kill, since Lin Zexu, you know. The portrait in the lower right depicts the act boss, and the portrait in the lower left shows you angrily staring at him from across the HUD. The first act pits us against a British gangster, the Iron Rat, but that's not his picture. You might think that contradicts what I said, but strangely, we never actually meet the Iron Rat. The boss of the first act is Han Zhao, a wealthy collaborator. Businessmen should never try to harm the Chinese people. Amen. Asking around the Guangzhou marketplace for a while, I finally find the route to the British Museum. I suppose Yu's new to town. I love all these unique people you can talk to, bustling around and selling their wares. Even the canal's green waters are alive with swimming koi. It gives you a sense of being part of a lively community in a way you just don't get in, say, The Legend of Zelda. In that game, you're supposedly liberating Hyrule, but where's the kingdom? Where are the people? All I see are monsters and the odd weirdo hiding in a cave. In Lin Zexu, though, I see what I'm fighting for. The folks at Waixingkou could render their Guangzhou and large character sprites in this loving detail because it's the only level in the whole game. Inside the British Museum, the music picks up. Tell me where your boss is hiding! We'll hide our fists in your face! Sort of like how Sonic Adventure is 1/3 weirdo platformer and 2/3 adventure field, Lin Zexu No Smoking is a brawler with adventure game elements. Not the easiest to control, however. Luckily, Yu is invincible. That yellow bar beside his icon represents health, but it never went down no matter how much of a beating he took. Is this a bug? Maybe not. Huangdi allows the player character to jump indefinitely. I know that the Yellow Emperor was supposedly superhuman, but seriously, even Samus Aran can't use the screw attack from the beginning. So, maybe games that are broken in such a way that the player can blast through them is a Chinese Famicom tradition? Frankly, if the alternative is pulling my hair out cheap deaths or hours of grinding, I'll take blasting through levels as an invincible superhero any day. The sprite flicker can be distracting, but that's hardly a sign of uniquely bad programming. Many Japanese Famicom games were loaded with sprite flicker too, albeit few where it gets quite this bad. If you hate sprite flickering, you won't enjoy Lin Zexu. Aside from that, I really like these graphics, wandering around a city of a kind that no longer exists, though some of the traditions represented here live on. It's interesting how historical Chinese cities, like most cities in the non-modern world, were wide more than they were tall. No high-rises, all sprawl. I admit that I repeatedly played the Han Zhao act and could find no way to advance. Lin Zexu tells us, the mansion has a secret entrance. The secret entrance is in Qi Shan's garden. But who is Qi Shan? Was I supposed to notice that? Yeah, I wasn't sure where to go even here. While I appreciate the detail of the adventure field map, the realistically rambling level design leaves me perpetually clueless as to which direction I'm supposed to walk until you simply won't move any further. No, can't go this way. Nope, can't go this way. Nope, can't go this way. Can I go this way? No, you're not welcome there until the curse is broken. They could have put up some kind of visible roadblock, right? Why leave it this confusing? Each chapter amounts to trial and error until you end up where you need to be. Ironically, figuring out where to go is by far the toughest part. Why does this mansion area require so many paths to nowhere when there's only one thing in the whole map? There are no secrets or Easter eggs, it's just a waste of time. You can tell that the level designers were amateurs, for better and for worse. Chi-Shan has a nice mansion. I like all the lily pads in his pond, and his green hedges. This degree of verisimilitude is rare for the Famicom. Eventually, I save and meet a woman sitting on a fence. She won't tell us about a secret entrance. Then we dive down a well into a tunnel full of human skeletons and skull torches. This is the second brawler stage, and whereas the rumble at the British Museum still felt relatively realistic, this is where I knew Lin Zexu No Smoking had plunged off the deep end. Some enemies drop items. These restore HP, or would if HP existed for Lung In Yu. The brawling feels wonky, but since I'm invincible, that doesn't matter. Sneaking into Han Zhao's mansion at night, a cool moment. We interrupt Han Zhao having sex, so he fights us in his underwear. You wouldn't have sexual moments like that in, well, most licensed Nintendo games. Zhao holds his own better than you'd expect from some chubby aristocrat. Okay, I'll spare you. Put an end to this opium smuggling. The second act, as you can see, bears quite the title, but from here on, the game is basically a succession of drug dealers to beat up, and explanations as to why we'll beat up each of them specifically. I mentioned that the real-world Lin Zexu wrote at least one famous letter. Now this digital Lin Zexu is asking you to deliver a letter too. The British drug dealers are not impressed. In hot pursuit of Li Yu's minions, Yu rides from the British Museum to the Black Forest of Fallen Souls. With a name like that, I expected a woods full of ghosts or something. Instead, we fight lingerie-clad women who throw what appear to be frisbees, maybe, that emit a truly ear-shattering shrieking noise. They can also stun-lock us in a way that is really difficult to escape, so thank goodness Yu is invulnerable. Make it stop! This sound must be their attack as much as the weapons themselves. They know they can't kill you, but they might hurt his ears enough that he gives up. Why are the men wearing period-appropriate get-ups, but the women are in bikinis? Since we're near the beach, I guess they were swimming? The bikini, as such, didn't exist until the late 1940s, but there are well-known mosaics from the 4th century Villa Romana de Casale depicting female athletes in bikinis, since it's a pretty common-sense design. In any case, the second act boss is some Indian guy working for the British. I think his name is Big Drug Dealer. Long Yin-yu says he'll go investigate Chi-chan's house. Let's go. Then I scoured every last corner of the map like 5 times and found nothing. Absolutely nothing. There is a new area with a sailor and an ominous British ship, but even though I tried pressing all 4 buttons, tiptoeing around him to attempt from new angles, nothing happened. He doesn't want to talk. I turned to the internet for answers. Eventually, after literally months of thinking my copy was bugged, I found a blurry video of someone playing through the game on YouTube, uploaded by a channel called Neko Gaming. The video incorrectly identifies Lin Zexu as a bird-eye perspective fighting and puzzle-solving game. This view is not top-down, nor is this a puzzle game. The adventure game elements are limited strictly to talking to NPCs in a linear sequence to trigger event flags. There are no puzzles. Notably, the developer logo and title screen in their version are totally different, and the text is not cut off in the intro. I also stumbled onto a blog called Lunatic Obscurity. The writer, Jonny, also gave up on Lin Zexu, but for a totally different reason. Judging from the screenshots, in Jonny's version of the game, Long Yin-yu can take damage. So my version was hacked. Beyond the translation, I mean. Alternatively, since there is at least one revision of the Lin Zexu Jinyan cart, judging by the different logos and title screens me and Neko Gaming got, the developer must have just decided to make you invulnerable to make sure players could reach the ending. Anyway, Neko Gaming figured out what to do. It's something that would never have occurred to me, ever. At Chi-chan's mansion, you have to hide behind a pillar to spy on Chi-chan conspiring with an opium smuggler. Yes, he's corrupt. Who would have guessed? That tunnel full of human remains connecting his house to Han Zhao's place seemed so above board. This makes sense narratively, but the game gives you no clue that you should do this, or even can. There is not a single hint that I'm aware of. If Long Yin-yu walks onto the estate and then says, "Oh no, Chi-chan's coming, I'd better hide," at least you might possibly think to press the left button here. But there's nothing. At 100% of every other point, these pillars are as impenetrable as any wall. You can go for a leisurely stroll around Chi-chan's empty estate for as long as you like, without the Mandarin and his gangster pal ever showing up. The amateurish level design lends the game world a lot of charm, but this is straight up hostile to the player. Anyway, now that we know some guy called the Old Wolf is bringing in a shipment of opium, Lin Zexu has us talk to this sailor after all. What follows is a battle on board the British ship. The lightning effects make this scene quite dramatic. Ironically, the purple coats' rifles are substantially less dangerous than the bikini women's frisbees. As with the Iron Rat in Act 1, for some reason we don't fight the Old Wolf. Instead, we fight the henchman we saw talking to Chi-chan, a guy named English Abel. I like that this British gangster is just nicknamed English. That sort of thing actually does happen. For example, in the autobiography of Malcolm X, good old Malcolm X mentions a veteran gangster he knew in Harlem named West Indian Archie. After another wacky fight, we catch Chi-chan in the act. For some reason, Long Yin-yu isn't feeling as lenient as he was after he beat up Han Zhao. By the way, like Lin Zexu, Chi-chan is a historical figure. After the Emperor dismissed Lin Zexu from viceroyship as a result of starting the First Opium War, Chi-chan was his replacement, and it was Chi-chan who officially handed Hong Kong over to the British. I think this was the first of the infamous unequal treaties that the Qing signed with Western powers. Hard to imagine a much more ignominious role in Chinese history. Some people think Chi-chan was a traitor. These people include the Daoguang Emperor. Clearly, the crew at Weixing Computer and Technology Co. don't think much of Qishan either. However, this silly, crappy video game Qishan seems to be totally different from the historical Qishan. For one thing, the historical Qishan probably did not look like a potato. The final act drops the brawler gameplay. Although shaking up the formula marks the finale as important, this was a mistake, since the new gameplay is a lot worse. The brawling was kind of incompetent and shallow, but the new gameplay is straight up boring. As you can see by the boss's portrait, this time we're fighting a ship. Not with our fists, unfortunately. Mixing up the formula in other ways, the fourth act begins next door to the martial arts school, where we go immediately to recruit the martial artists for Lin Zexu's new navy. Seems more like we should head to the wharf if we're looking to build a navy, though. Sir, the people are very dedicated. Everyone is willing to serve the country. People are the backbone of China. They are truly the soul of the country. Indeed. Whoa, this is so deep. After a weird, terrible bit where you stand still, glancing back and forth cluelessly as the player presses the attack button to try and hit these British ships, I mean, I don't even know how you know if you hit them. Long Yin-Yu hops aboard a ship for a shoot-'em-up segment. Also, as you might notice, for the first time in the game, I can take damage. Look how low the health bar is. I guess that's because the enemy is shooting at walls and crewmen, and not at the superhuman Long Yin-Yu specifically. Fortunately, dodging the British ship's cannon fire proves easy. After the final boss, a huge British galleon, the game gives us this end screen. That bald guy must be so embarrassed. Though the real Opium Wars didn't end quite like this. But hey, based on the portrayal of Qishan, we already knew this was an alternate history story. Then we have the credits. Peng Chen's definitely the standout talent here, since the artwork is the best part. While Lin Zexu No Smoking might not be a good brawler or good adventure game on a system that had plenty of both, I can't help but love it for being something so off the beaten path. With the lively environments and efforts at storytelling, you get the sense that the developers cared about what they were doing and wanted their culture to be represented in video games. That sincerity shines through the bad design decisions. By being a Chinese Famicom cart, Lin Zexu also draws attention to certain economic realities that the video game community rarely confronts. We're concerned with fairness in video games, but only in the games themselves, and not in who is able to play them, who has the time, the money, or even lives in a place where the systems and games are available. You know, if nothing else, I hope you remember that there's more to Chinese video games than, well, depressing but impressive copies of famous video games made for audiences denied the real deal. There were already more ambitious Chinese video games more than 15 years ago, though they remain obscurities best I can tell. Taiwanese developers seem to have led the charge, rather than mainland Chinese developers who are now catching up. For example, there's that award-winning smash-hit free-to-play multi-million-dollar Genshin Impact floating around social media lately. I hear mixed things, some people love it, others criticize it as pay-to-win crap. Initially, I expected I'd like Genshin Impact, because I am weak against a vast, colorful environment, and lots of cute girls. But the story's such generic fantasy anime crap, and so clearly aimed at children that I find it off-putting. Also, MiHoYo has repeatedly demonstrated carelessness with their users' data, so maybe I'm lucky that my copy of Genshin Impact doesn't work anymore. The high-quality horror adventure Devotion drew press as much for its artistic ambitions as for being shut down because of mainland China's intolerance of criticism. Though that same developer's game Detention is still available, telling a story about the horrific impact of the White Terror, in a style reminiscent of the Cat Lady. I'm fond of this one super low-budget indie game called At Home Alone from the developer Skyline Games. The translation is, shall we say, rough. But I found it oddly charming. A simple RPG Maker game, the appealing colors and strikingly simple art style distinguish it from others. The initially cutesy veneer gives way to a nightmarish time loop, and plot details appear in the game files Doki Doki Literature Club style. One Chinese video game I highly recommend is Fantablade Network's Icy. It looks generic. Don't let that fool you. This 2016 heart-pumping sci-fi flavor hack-and-slash features battling robots and a cryptic storyline that somehow combines the horror of the King in Yellow mythos with something like the Stanley Parable. Though from the reviews, it sounds like they added an English language narrator who's terrible. Be sure to set his voice to the Mandarin audio track. Obviously, Chinese video games have come a long way since Lin Zexu, but video game culture, like all aspects of culture, would never make any progress without pioneers. With their attempt at an unusual genre mix with uniquely Chinese themes, Weixin Computer and Technology Co. was one of those pioneers. Well, if you're feeling especially generous. And if you are feeling especially generous, maybe you can hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and there's gonna be more Famicom adventures, and I also do other things. I can make videos about, like, books and other more detailed, like, analytical video essays and that kind of thing. That's what I'm trying to do. Like, comment, subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter, too. The next Famicom adventures features Satan.